Hello, this is Dr. Deb Watry, and I'm going to give you a review for week 7, our last week for the course. So I congratulate you on completing 6 weeks. We have 1 week left to go, and basically you're going to be completing that final project where you make sure that your chapters 1, 2, and 3 and all of the other pieces of your preliminary thesis paper is complete. So week 7, there is no additional reading. You have the video. Your assignment, there's no discussion, is to submit that chapter 1 through 3, and I'll talk about all the requirements for you. And I also do have 2 resources for you, a checklist to look at as you're doing and completing that thesis chapters 1, 2, and 3. So we've covered these chapters in the BUI text. Those of you that will be taking TED 752, we will be addressing and using this same textbook to write chapters 4 and 5. So as you're taking a look now at completing that chapters 1, 2, and 3, you will have a correct title page, an updated table of contents with the correct page numbers, your chapter 1, and remember you want to write that out, that number out, introduction, chapter 2, literature review, chapter 3, research method. All of these should have a page break at the end so that the page numbers do not run together. You have separate references, and that should be updated, and appendices. You should have at least 2 appendices. You should have your IRB approval letter from the IRB committee and your consent letter, parent consent letter, which you did last week. And then those would be the appendices that you would have in there. This is your last really big assignment. It's worth 25 points, and if you've kept up with rewriting and making changes in chapters 1, 2, and 3, basically taking care of the title page, table of contents, checking your references, and having this notification letter and parent consent letter, you should be good to go. But do make sure this is all in APA format, so that's a very important aspect of this writing. So if you're not too sure, I always invite you to say, hey, have somebody else read through your paper. Somebody you know is good in English, could catch your sentence fragments, punctuation errors, because I don't serve as an editor, and I may see something I didn't see originally in your rough draft or your rewrite that shows up in your final write. So do have somebody you trust as a good writer to read through this. APA format must be followed in your reference page, in your citation of sources, in your format for your table of contents in that, so we've stressed that all along. The checklist will help to make sure you have all the necessary parts and you have the correct items and that they're aligned well. All of this research, chapters 1, 2, and 3, and all of the videos and all of the rewrites that I've asked you to do, I've always emphasized this is written in past tense. It's not something you will do, but it's something that you have done, because when you do submit it, chapter 5 and 752, your research is already finished. So you don't want to have to go back and make all those changes. You want to make sure that you check over your citations. When I sent back your chapters 1, 2, and 3, did you put the citations in that I asked you to put in? You refer to yourself always as third person. You don't say my research, I did this. It's always the researcher. Okay, so that's what's meant by third person. So there should be no personal reference, the I, the me, our. Actually, there's no second person either. You don't want to say you or we, so it's written in third person. Spacing of your sections, remember everything is double spaced. Okay, please take a look. Some of you have a fake, kind of a too much of a space between your items, and I think I pointed that out when I noted it, that everything is double spaced. This is written in Times New Roman 12-point font, and there's 1-inch margin all the way around. Okay, 1-inch margin. Now the page numbers, I'll show a little picture of page number in just a second, but your title page has no page number. Table of contents would use a Roman numeral. The first page in your thesis, starting on page 1, is your first chapter. Okay, so that's where I should see that page 1. How do you check to make sure you've done this? What I would suggest, and this is what I do with your paper, I run off your reference page. And then as you cite things in your paper, I check to see that these match up. And so you need to do that again. That's one of the hallowed rules for writing research, that what's listed in your reference page, you've cited. What you've cited in your paper is listed in your reference page. So I will check for complete references. I'll check if the DOIs are correct or the journal webpage title. So that's something we've tried to address all along. And some of you have done an excellent job of going back in and getting the DOI numbers in that. Because you're going to have at least two things in your appendix, you have to use the plural, and that would be appendices. Okay, you want to use the plural, appendices. And then some of you still need to put on a running head, and I'll show you an example in just a second, but that starts already on your title page, and then it runs through every page of your paper. And the reason they do that, in case your papers got mixed up or unordered or something like that, they always would then be able to tell it belongs to you because of your running head. So here's an example of the running head. There's in the APA resource section right at the top of our course, there are, I think, 2 resources for putting in a header and page numbering. Some of you are already set with that. Notice this right here, running head, lowercase, a colon, and then your running head is a shortened version of your title, okay, and it's all in caps. Okay, so when you look at that title page, some of you don't have this yet. All of the title gets put in capital letters, and the spacing in the template, I would say move your title down a little bit so we have a little bit of free space here. You've got a whole page to work with. This would be your name. Now you would not yet have 752. You put that in there when you take that class. You would have TED 750. And again, these are the resources we've used. This one in particular, the APA Citation Basics and doing reference list, in-text. So we've used all of these. This APA Tables and Figures you will use more for Chapter 4 and 5. Let's take care of now. Notice now that running head will show up here. Only in that title page will you see the little letters running head. So here's the abbreviated title, the running head that will run throughout. And notice the table of contents. This person, this was their final write. So they had some tables and charts. Those all get Roman numerals, and they had their abstract in there and an acknowledgement. So for you, this would be a Roman numeral 1, your table of contents. Make sure that your sections line up correctly with your pages. Okay, so don't use the template. You want to make sure the page numbers line up with your page numbers. Okay, and notice we've got that summary section in each of the pages. One error right here, this was a change, right? Remember, we're writing out that number. Chapter 1, write out the numbers. Okay, so the running head, Chapter 1, starts on page 1. This is an error. You're going to write out the number there. I want to talk about references because you will have at least 2. All of your references, you just don't write appendix. Okay, each of your items that you will put in your appendix, whether it's your letter of consent, your survey and all that, will have their separate pages. You do a page break between each one. So you would have your IRB approval letter, and you might want to put that first, and that would be Appendix A. And you would have your document of informed consent, the letter you'd send home to your parents. So I should see at least 2 things. When you develop your Chapter 4, or when you start working on your research, all of your checklist, your pre-test, post-test, your surveys, your interviews, all of those become a separate appendix. So when I was reading your Chapter 3 and you referred to that, I had an appendix and a question mark because they will all be a form that should show up in your appendix. In this week, I have put in 2 checklists for thesis writing. These are from different universities, okay, but they do provide for you good items to review. You do follow the UW Superior Thesis template. And again, I encourage you to have an editor, someone with solid writing skills to proofread your paper. and look for that structure and citation errors. So you're finished with chapter 3. Once you get your IRB approval, you can start your research. And some of you will be taking 715, 752 in the next semester, so you can start your research right away. If you're not going to take it, you're going to do your research in March or April, and then come back in the summer. I do not know if the university will be offering 752 in the summer, but they generally offer it every semester. So once you get your approval, you want to make sure you have your consent letter, and this is something that you did last week. Okay, notice that if you looked and studied the validity and ethics, you also, if a student is over 11 years old, should have a written assent form, and it could be a matter of maybe a paragraph or two and 1 or 2 checks. That student should be able to give an assent to do the research also. Okay, so you can start developing your research instruments after you get IRB approval, and this would be your pre-test, post-test, interview questions, your surveys, your checklist, whatever you're going to use. Each one, remember, becomes an appendix in your paper, but you can start developing them, so you can get kind of a head start on doing your research. Some things I would encourage you to do is to keep a record of whatever you've done. So if you take 2 hours and create your, not your journal, you create a checklist. Keep track of what you've done and when you've done it. Keep your dates there, because you're going to refer to that when you talk about the process you used to collect your data and how you analyzed it. If you're doing qualitative, a study or a mixed method, and you're doing some type of interview, it's okay to tape record, but you don't have to. But quotes are very nice then if you're doing a qualitative research study, to put that in chapter 4. So you want to make sure that you're doing this ahead of time, because you can't go back and re-interview the person. So plan ahead. You've already told several people, the IRB committee and so forth, and in your letter of consent, of how you're going to keep that data secure. So you want to make sure that you do keep your data secure, that somebody else doesn't get an opportunity to take a look at it. So here we are. If you take a look at our puzzle pieces, you have your introduction. Remember, this was the biggest part of that writing, that literature review, and you've developed your methods. An abstract isn't put in until you do chapter 4 and 5. And chapter 4 and 5 would be a discussion of presenting your results, and the discussion and the conclusion. So you have a large part of your thesis done already, and you've done a very nice job. So I congratulate you. So we are finished, and I hope you have a good week of writing. I am looking forward to seeing your finished copies, and do have a good week.